everyone. From time to time, I write something when there's something particularly complex happening and I have to get my thoughts in close formal order. And so I did that this week. I wrote an article for The Telegraph. I'm going to read it here. It's called, "I'm pro-Muslim, but anti-thug." Over the past few years, I've engaged in a continual dialogue with people across the spectrum of Islam, from Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who left her religious upbringing behind, through moderates such as Mustafa Akyol and Hamza Yusuf, and with forays into the more conservative side, with Muhammad Hijab, for example, a rather temperamental young Muslim, not without his influence in the UK. I have done this because I believe that Jews, Christians, and Muslims share more in common than in division, and because I know that since there is no such thing as a world without religion, we all must do what is best with what we have been bequeathed. I find myself in some arguably serious online trouble this week, nonetheless, although I realize I'm far from alone in this, because I indicated my desire that the authorities in Israel give the terrorists who invaded their land and tortured and killed their citizens the hell that they most truly deserve. How could I say such a thing while simultaneously maintaining my desire for a rapprochement between the peoples of the Abrahamic tradition? Let us begin that discussion by rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God's. The attack on Israel last week by the monsters of Hamas occurred, as far as I am concerned, not because Muslims and Jews must by religious necessity be at each other's throats, but because Iran, a country run by thugs and deemed so even by its own people, has become very concerned that the rulers of Saudi Arabia will continue in their laudable attempts to formulate a productive peace with Israel. 4 Arab countries recently signed the Abraham Accords, a Trump-era initiative that should have garnered that ex-president, for all his manifold faults, a Nobel Peace Prize, at least in a world where the likes of Barack Obama were deemed worthy of such an honor. Behind the Arab signatories, who were essentially the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan, stood the Saudis, without whose tacit agreement no such steps would have been taken. And everyone knew it. Joe Biden and the Democrats had a historic and unparalleled opportunity to bring the Saudis into the fold soon after they took power from Trump. Instead, demonstrating an almost miraculous short-sightedness, they alienated that sometimes troublesome Middle Eastern power almost immediately after adopting office, choosing instead of peace the opportunity to deny to the previous president of the United States any of the honor he most truly deserved for his revolutionary breakthrough, one that had been deemed utterly impossible by the blinkered fools who ruled the State Department for decades. To say it again, the Saudis would have come aboard the great ship of the Abraham Accords 2 years ago had Biden seized the opportunity. Instead, he and his fellow Democrats downplayed the significance of the Trump administration's cardinal achievement, just to score the cheapest and most expensive of political points. And here we are again, in consequence, drowning in the blood of many, Israeli and Palestinian alike. Despite being snubbed in a truly provocative manner and their consequent and justified anger. Remember the Saudi unwillingness to provide the US with additional oil when Biden asked? Remember their recent flirtation with China? The Saudi leaders have been strongly considering the continuation and extension of the Abrahamic peace process in consequence. The totalitarian mullahs of Iran have been driven to desperation, knowing full well that such an agreement would undermine and isolate them fatally. This is the same Iran, by the way, that the Democrats under Biden have utterly failed to resist and control, continuing a pattern well established by the aforementioned Nobel laureate Obama. And what of Iran? Is it a shining star in the Islamic firmament? Or is it a country hag-ridden by a pathologically self-serving criminal kleptocracy, religious in name only? Let's turn to psychology for a moment to answer that question. There is a form of psychopathology, well detailed in recent years, the veritable place where psychological instability meets evil itself. The personality features that are part and parcel of that danger to integrated psyche and state alike first acquired the nomenclature of dark triad, a combination of Machiavellianism, instrumental manipulativeness and deceit, narcissism, inflated false self-esteem and desire for unearned attention and status, and psychopathy, a malignant mixture of criminal propensity, callousness, and parasitism. The dark triad traits were identified and measured by intellectual descendants of the Canadian Dr. Robert Hare, who spent his life assessing and endeavoring to understand the worst of the habitual criminals, responsible not only for the most barbaric and cruel of misdemeanors, but also for the vast majority of criminal acts. The famous Pareto principle of unequal distribution of talent and acquisition applies to the underworld as well. Just as 1% of the world's inhabitants hold something approximating 70% of the wealth, so 1% of the criminals commit 70% of the crimes. But all that's not bad enough, bad as it is. More recent investigators of the structure of the darkest of temperamental propensities found it necessary to add an extra dimension to the measurement matrix. Sadism, positive delight in the suffering of others. The more unnecessary and gratuitous, the better. So now we have the dark tetrad. Dark tetrad types fit well into what is known as cluster B of the personality disorders, which also includes such delights as antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, the female equivalent of the criminal tendency, histrionic personality disorder, also mostly female, and narcissistic personality disorder. Those who manifest cluster B symptomatology or sins have, in addition to their other psychologically and socially dangerous tendencies, the proclivity to claim positive virtue or outright victim status while pursuing their utterly self-serving, grandiose, and destructive claims. The cluster B types lie, cheat, steal, gossip, reputation savage, brag, claim credit where none is due, and distribute blame to everyone but themselves, all the while pursuing nothing but their own immediate, immature, hedonistic self-gratification, all the while trumpeting their moral virtue and or brandishing their identity as unfairly oppressed innocents. When they organize, and this happens from time to time, they threaten the integrity of the entire society within which they operate, hoping to light everything aflame and dance orgiastically in the ruins. This happened after the French Revolution. It happened in Soviet Russia. It happened in Nazi Germany. It's happening now in the West with the rise of the woke. It's something markedly facilitated by the power, accessibility, and irresponsibility of social media, which allows for cluster B misbehavior to propagate with none of the usual real-world consequences. And we haven't plunged far enough into the abyss yet. Think for a moment. Use your imagination for evil, if you dare. If you are hell-bent on doing nothing but maximizing your own resentful, narrowly self-serving, juvenile pleasure, hoping as well to do maximal harm along the way to anyone skilled and conscientious enough to have deserved a just reward, in what guise would you cloak yourself? If you were the least bit treacherously wise, you would adopt a religious cover. How better to camouflage yourself than in the robes of all that is traditional, just, merciful, and ethical? That is less effective in the West post-death of God in consequence of the collapse of religious authority. So here, the dark Tetrad types portray themselves as the very avatars of compassion. We're for the downtrodden, because we can then in good conscience punish the deservedly successful. We're for diversity, because an ethical unity stands against our depredations. We're for inclusivity, because our fetishes and kinks demand their full expression, and to hell with everyone else. We're for equity, because merit is our sworn enemy. Ask yourself this, too. How else are you to explain the staggeringly incomprehensible spectacle of, for example, Queers for Palestine? Perhaps the most egregious example of the union of the desire by progressives to tear down everything in the West that is worthy, even at the cost of formulating an alliance that would in an instant be suicidal if it ever made itself manifest. And for those Muslims thinking that it's the evil Jews trademark registered, is Iran your idea of a worthy Islamic state?